I'm stranded on the Skyblock island, and the only way to escape is for me to conquer Gregtech, Minecraft's most realistic mod. But the clean room stands in my way. I hate the clean room, and it must be defeated for its crimes against me, so I've hatched a plan to both further my escape and end the clean room once and for all. I'll destroy cleanliness itself by polluting the air with my EBFs, but to produce enough smog for that, we're going to need speed. High speed steel! EBF coils that are extra hot and extra fast, but high-speed steel is no easy alloy, and I'll need to use every last brain cell in my skull in order to progress through extreme voltage and insane voltage tiers of technology. In order to defeat the clean room, I'll have to build it first. So we need concrete, which requires me to make a load of clay within my large barrels, macerate it, and then mix it with stone dust and water. That'll need to be combined with steel frames and plastic sheets, but we're low on steel, so I need to take a detour to EBF some more. Honestly, I should probably just pass this. But that aside, combining concrete, steel, and plastic makes plascrete blocks that make the frame of the clean room, and for aesthetics, I use glass instead of concrete for a few of these blocks, turn them into clean room glass so it's not just a white box in the middle of my base. But plascrete and glass does not a clean room make, and so I need to spend far longer than I'd like making high voltage pumps in order to craft the controller block and the 8 clean room filters required for the smallest size. Still, this is all honestly cheap. Steel isn't bad for us anymore, and concrete's free. The pumps are annoying, but not really enough to be expensive, so why does it feel like I'm forgetting some extremely expensive component? Right. Our machines need to be inside of the clean room, but our power needs to be outside of it, so in order to pass power through the walls, we need a diode block. And diode blocks only accept SMD diodes, which are the only SMD component that I haven't made because they require platinum. Platinum! Again, the clean room spits in my face and laughs. If I truly want to construct it, I need to suffer the platinum group processing line, and for that, we need the literal king of acid, aqua regia, part of the nitric acid processing line. Now, I could just overclock a large chemical reactor to high voltage in order to make the nitric acid and the aqua regia super easily, but if I do that, well, I'm admitting defeat. I'm admitting that I don't want high voltage hatches, that I can just get away with lowly medium voltage hatches. I can't show the clean room weakness. We are mixing this by hand. Nitrogen and hydrogen to make ammonia. Ammonia and oxygen to make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide and oxygen make nitrogen dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide and water makes nitric acid, half of which I save because we're not done yet. The other half I have to mix with hydrochloric acid to produce the alchemist stream. Royal water, aqua regia. Named for its ability to dissolve gold itself, aqua regia shall be our sous chef of platinum processing. I can now dissolve chalcopyrite and nitric acid to produce the platinum group sludge, and then centrifuging it with aqua regia present to separate it into loads of metal-rich dusts, including raw platinum powder, which can finally be electrolyzed to obtain pure platinum. Good lord, we can now make the tiny handful of SMD diodes needed to complete our dubious clean room. And now I can cut the wafers for high voltage hatches, and I waste absolutely no time in relishing the profits of our labor. I bathe in the light of high voltage hatches and prepare my assault against the endless swaths of clean air. May the void fill with smog. May thy filters choke on the ashes of my empire. You have invented the very means of your defeat. High voltage energy hatches are not the greatest of spoils from our conquest, not at all. We can now make extreme voltage circuits. The microprocessor supercomputer is not a cheap craft by any means, but EV is where things really begin to pick up, as now we have access to the vacuum freezer multi-block, capable of cooling higher tier ingots. And I'm definitely far beyond keeping my base even somewhat organized by this point, so I just throw down this box of aluminum right next to our AE storage system and begin just chucking white hot globs of metal inside of it, such as my wonderful nichrome, which is somehow still hot after sitting around for a week or so. But cooling it means we can finally mill it into wires and assemble those into valuable nichrome coils, which we can now use to upgrade our EBFs. I even overclock them to extreme voltage because EV EBFs are just insane. I mean, 14 seconds for stainless steel, down from 55. It's overpowered. With nichrome on my EBFs, the Eye of Sauron turns to my endlessly slow supply of vital ingots, steel, aluminum, stainless steel, and of course, course, we'll need titanium and tungsten. But we can use applied energistics to passive these resources.
Jojo, what does passive mean?
Well, you see, in packs that use mods like Gregtech, we're gonna end up needing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of certain resources. And although we have access to on-demand crafting, a far better solution for these resources is to have them being made automatically, forever, without my intervention. Hence, these resources are passive. But we must be smart about auto-crafting, so let's get some basic preparations done. I can now make high-voltage upgrade kits which will push our diamond burning power even further, but have the nasty side effect of burning our diamonds away even quicker. That's probably not going to bite us in the butt. Now, in order to produce all the gravel and sand we'll need to extract resources out of, I go ahead and make an infinite cobblestone storage cell for my AE system, which does exactly what it says on the box and is extremely powerful for this pack. And the last thing I do is tinker with my EBF line to get them all nice and ready for infinite processing. First up, steel. Not an issue at all because we already produce an infinite amount of oxygen, and although we don't yet have infinite iron, we'll need to make that later, so a simple oxygen and iron ingot export gets our LV metal a-flowing. Aluminum is even easier since I just have to export infinite aluminum dust into the EBF infinitely, and it makes an infinite amount of aluminum ingots. That being said, we don't actually want them to produce an infinite amount of ingots, so I do put some redstone controls on our EBFs to shut them off once they reach a certain amount of stuff. I say 4,000 ingots is pretty good. But now that we have the two simple ingots out of the way, the difficulty curve comes a bit of a cliff. Next up, we have stainless steel. This is no simple blend. If we want it passive, then we need to passive manganese, iron, nickel, and chromium. Ugh. Remember that auto sieving machine that I used for topaz last episode? Time to make a whole lot more of those because all of those resources can be processed from some amount of ore sieving. But I do need to clean up the setup, so let's go around how it works. It's a fairly simple structure, 25 sieves filled with the proper meshes, an item collector into a storage controller, and an ME exporter on the deployer to fuel up with sand, gravel, or blackstone, and of course, a storage bus on the storage controller to access all of our resources from AE. I'd like to make some ruby ore, so we need to put sand on flint meshes for 12 different resources, only one of which is ruby. And now shifting my focus a little bit, let's tackle one stone with two birds. Infinite iron means infinite stainless steel and regular steel too, and oh boy, it looks like the kinetic sieve is a good way to get the iron ores flowing. So a bunch of treated wood and brass screws later, and we have another big boy up and running. But we need a way to smelt the iron automatically. And thankfully, we have access to the bulk smelter, which can smelt stacks of items at once, and even do alloying recipes too. That said, it needs more circuits than we currently have, so I've got to take a quick HV circuit crafting detour before getting our fancy schmancy super smelter up and running with iron and magnetite ore exporting automatically in and iron exporting automatically out. So there's our iron for iron dust and ruby for chromium, but we still need manganese and nickel, which comes from pyrolusite and pentlandite respectively, so we'll need to add 2 more auto sieving setups to our processing line. Starting to get kind of long here. Pentlandite comes from crushed blackstone, and to get that going, I need to make an igneous extruder that produces blackstone into a macerator that crushes it into what we need. And then, using applied energistics, I can route it into the system and get that pentlandite and bornite flowing. For pyrolusite, we need more iron meshes, so I spend some time staring into my assemblers while I craft them up, and thankfully, it's only gravel needed for pyrolusite, much easier than blackstone. And now we've got all the raw ores we need. Time to process them. And funny enough, we can do the same exact thing to all 3 of them, and it's fast enough at low voltage, so we're going to keep it there unless there's a tier limitation. Each ore needs to get forge hammered into a dirty dust, or washed into a clean dust, and then electrolyzed into various bits, bobs, and gases, but what we care about are the outputs chromium, manganese, and nickel. And to get iron dust, we can just macerate the iron ingots. So now all of those dusts can be created and exported automatically into a mixer and sent automatically into the EBF for automatic and infinite amounts of stainless steel. I wish I could smelt it at extreme voltage since it's 14 seconds instead of 55 at high voltage, but infinite is infinite, and extreme voltage energy hatches are coming soon, don't you worry. And speaking of, we need titanium for extreme voltage machinery and hatches, and since we'll be pushing through that mess, we may as well passive it. In fact, it's one of my favorite processing lines. See, we can't just make titanium dust. We need to use the titanium tetrachloride loop in order to smelt it down, which, if done right, you can recycle every input except for rutile dust. And rutile comes from sieving and ore processing. Okay, we're gonna need bauxite, which comes from sieving gravel on diamond meshes, and you guessed it, hammer, wash, electrolyze, and we have even more aluminum, oxygen, oxygen byproduct. Oh my god, that stuff is free. But we also have rutile. Let's get to work. I can combine chlorine, carbon, and rutile dust to make titanium tetrachloride and carbon dioxide. The CO2 can be separated into an electrolyzer to get back the carbon we used and trash the oxygen we extracted. The titanium tetrachloride goes into an EBF alongside some magnesium dust that I made earlier from crushed obsidian, and that begins to smelt into a hot titanium ingot and 6 magnesium chloride byproducts. Lo and behold, those 6 magnesium chloride byproducts can be electrolyzed back into all of the chlorine and magnesium we used to make the titanium tetrachloride. So as long as we keep inserting rutile into the system, we have an infinite and honestly pretty free source of titanium. All we gotta do is use AE to automatically send the hot titanium ingots into the vacuum freezer, and we have ourselves a nice little passive system. But before we push deeper into insanity, I really could use a break, so I'm gonna do a little bit of tasteful AFK. Now, problems, like the dubious whack-a-mole, have a tendency to pop up as you crush them. For instance, I've been mindlessly sieving away resources and expanding our EBF away, all whilst ignoring a dwindling power fuel supply and the fact that I haven't made any superconductor metals. Speaking of, if we want to make our HSSG coils and defeat cleanliness itself, we'll need the IV assembler, which is going to ask us to use some EV technology to make it, and EV may as well stand for Ender Voltage since its superconductor is Endurium. Truth be told, it's pretty cheap, but of course, we don't have any lead being automated, and since that's 33% of the entire blend, why don't we add another kinetic sieve to the base, since it's a pretty good method of getting galena? But of course, whack one mole and another rears its snarling fangs. We're out of crushed blackstone, which we need for galena ore, so I've got to upgrade the blackstone processing line, which is not really an issue. We just have to add a high voltage macerator, but again, more moles. We're completely out of string for the 1000th time, something we need to make the mesh blocks for the kinetic sieve, and I'm really tired of using those damn worms, so we're pivoting to a more permanent solution here. A large farm fueled by fertilizer can produce a stack of flax plants in mere seconds, and one single flax plant can be turned into string. So, in less than a minute after setting the machine up, we have thousands of string right at our fingertips. Side note, where does the bag that the fertilizer comes in come from? I mean, there's no bag in this chemical reaction. Where does it come from? Anyways, now that we have passive string, we can go back to making another damn sieve for passive lead. And now that we have passive lead, passive diamonds, and passive ender pearls, we can make as much endurium as we want. Another mole, however, we need EV power to smelt it, and god damn it, our power cables are struggling to keep up with the demands of all of our machines, and even worse, our diamond fuel supply is starting to drop really fast. But the first problem is the easier one to solve, so I'm gonna stick with that. Power cables have limitations, but what doesn't have limits is just teleporting your power. But for that, we need to make ourselves a large chemical reactor, and honestly, it's about time, especially since we have thousands of PTFE. I mean, we can make the HV energy hatches too. I can't believe I didn't make one of these earlier. Well, I guess I was focused on the clean room, right? Inside of our new LCR, I can combine 64 buckets of lava and 32 redstone dust to make fluix dust, which can be combined with enderise and obsidian to make a useful flux network. Enderise we have, but obsidian's a pain to make in large quantities, except not really, because I can make a high voltage rock breaker, which is like an igneous extruder, but I can just tell it to make obsidian for free and forever. And now that we have an infinite supply of fluix and flex components, I can teleport our power around the base with 0 transfer limits. It's kind of overpowered, actually. Now, it is way easier and way infiniter to transport our power, but our diamonds are getting pretty low. I gotta push on, though. I've taken too long. I can feel the air getting clean. Let's work on Ivy. It'll be fine. And it looks like we'll be taking a trip to Sweden for insane voltage, since we'll need tungsten, which is another recyclable processing line like titanium, but we'll need to run the process at extreme voltage, and you can't imagine the amount of moles that come with rushing through a tech tier. Okay, we probably can, since all we do here, and even if you can't, well, here's our shopping list. We need to create extreme voltage assembler for the emerald meshes, we need to unlock extreme voltage energy hatches while we're at it to get overclocks that we'll need for HSSG, and we need to make the high voltage circuit assembler with our EV circuits to eventually make IV circuits. Sure, that's like 3 steps, but it kind of encompasses a lot. Like automating nitrogen so that we can process phosphorus doped silicon boules for higher tier wafer processing, creating a new aluminum cable which needs PVC sheets, and prepping a stock of titanium plates for EV machine holes, milling Canthal wires and creating magnetic neodymium rods for the EV electric motors, and the overall tearing up chore of bolt crafting new circuits and preparing diamond meshes to be converted into emerald ones. And after a blind rush of EV tier prep, I smashed together all the resources for the EV assembler and converter converter and begin to process our new emerald meshes, which of course will take a while to make, so in the meantime, let's push for goal 3, the high voltage circuit assembler. A side note here, EV circuits are so annoying to make right now because they require 2 ingots of blue alloy. Not blue steel, which isn't that bad, but blue alloy, which is just so slow to make, and you don't really use it for anything else, so I never have a lot of it, just ugh. Anyways, alongside the high voltage circuit assembler, I make a high voltage laser engraver since we'll definitely need that for higher tier wafers, such as the MPIC wafer that we need to make for the EV energy hatches. You see, it's all connected. That being said, if you thought we were close to EV energy hatches, wrong. We need an EV cutter, which of course needs a new special alloy buzzsaw, in this case, Ultimate. But in a twist of fate, I actually had enough resources to mix the stuff right away and plunk it into an EBF for a nice fiery bath. So in the meantime, I work on making even more EV circuits, and I also remembered to unmute my video game audio. Sorry. But just in time too, as our Ultimate is ready to go, and so is our EV cutter. And of course, it needs to be in the stupid clean room, so we need an EV diode and EV power line, and just, I hate the clean room. Well, now we can cut those MPIC wafers, but not before I switch out using distilled water for lubricant, since it's way easy to make, and by far the fastest liquid inside of a cutting machine. Of course, we're still not able to complete all of our goals here, because EV hatches require tungsten to make it, so it's off to sieving land once again, since we can extract tungsten from scheelite or tungstate, and that comes from those emerald meshes that have been cooking in the background. And after inexplicably blacking out and waking up with another complete mesh setup, we have infinite amounts of those ores flying right in. Now, tungsten is a lot like titanium in that the process to make it can recycle every input, save for the scheelite or the tungstate, so that's pretty fun. But we'll need to run the process entirely at extreme voltage tier, so I pony up some star coins to the shop to save me some crafting grief and just buy the circuits that I need. And now, for the lovely tungsten loop. I choose tungstate as my ore, and that gets a nice bath in some hydrochloric acid, which creates tungstate acid and lithium chloride. Electrolyzing the tungstate acid nets us nice, tasty tungsten, and all the hydrogen we use to make the hydrochloric acid. And you might have guessed that electrolyzing the lithium chloride makes us a lithium byproduct and all the chlorine we use to make the acid. So all we have to do is chemically react the chlorine and hydrogen again to make back all the hydrochloric acid and restart the loop. I love these. I really love these. Now we just have to process down our tungstate, hammering, washing, and then send it right into the processing line for infinite amounts of tungsten dust. And that's a really good thing to have infinite amounts of because it's actually useful in 3 forms at the moment: tungsten, tungsten steel, and tungsten carbide. And do you hear that? That polluting hiss? The sound of industry running unchecked? I think we've passived our last resource today. Finally, I am now on the edge of blackening our skies and defeating the evil clean room. But in order to smelt the HSSG that I want, we will need the power of RTM coils. And although we still need to create the EV energy hatches, I really want to break from saying EV, so instead, let's push RTM. It stands for ruthenium tungsten molybdenite, and we only have tungsten automated. And can you guess how we get molybdenite? Well, if you said anything other than sieving and something and processing and I hate this. Sieve. And there we go. Dyslexic nightmare. Like, actually, seriously though, molybdenite, a BD combo that is unreal. Unfortunately for me, ruthenium isn't actually so mundane to get our hands on, because we need to do a whole lot more of that miserable platinum group sludge thing. Ugh, I hate it. But luckily, we do now have access to sheldonite ore, which turns into plenty of sludge, but we get it from sieving. But I don't have to automate it yet, so that's nice. What am I doing with my life where this is more interesting than automation? Well, anyways, nitric acid is a whole lot easier to make inside of a large chemical reactor, since we can just combine all of the base chemicals instead of having to take multiple steps. That being said, inert metal mixture takes a really long time and does not turn into much ruthenium. And if we want an EBF's worth of stuff, we'll need 128 ruthenium, so I'm gonna be here for a really long time running the sludge through my machines. And after an even longer time than I expected, we can finally at least begin smelting our RTM ingots, but they take a really long time, so I'd like to work on EV energy hatches. Thankfully, we can blast up some tungsten steel, can you guess what it's made out of, which we can use to make the last ingredient for the extreme voltage energy hatch, the extreme voltage coil. Now, most of our EBFs can now run off of EV power, and I even isolated another EBF to overclock it to IV power to super speed the smelting of RTM. And then, we have a critical power issue. Like, base-ending power issue, the kind that shuts off our AE system and forces me to pull the plug on all of our EBFs just to keep things stable. And what follows is a desperate and futile attempt at making a new gem fuel called a diatron and special upgrades to my dynamos to stave off the lack of FE and our shriveling diamond supply. But after hours and hours of failure, I realized that nothing matters. Nothing actually matters but my defeat of the clean room. I have enough diamond backlog to last me a few hours, even more if I'm careful. It's just a small setback, a tiny mole in the system. I mean, if I whack it anyways, another will arise. So why don't we just ignore it and finish blasting the RTM and get ourselves a shiny new set of RTM coils, which we can add to our isolated EBF, and now have the power to smelt high-speed steel G. Only issue is we can't do anything we want with it until we have an IV assembler, but luckily, the IV metal is tungsten carbide. Very easy to make for us, and the wire is shellite, which is also a very simple blend of black bronze and signalum. Unluckily, assemblers take 4 circuits of their tier and need to be powered by a converter, which also takes 1 circuit of their tier. So we find ourselves in need of a whopping 5 IV circuits, and we have to make the microprocessor mainframes, which take 2 EV circuits and insane amounts of wires and resources. So I embark on an absolutely titanic circuit crafting bender, all while the timer of my diamond supply ticks in the background. I make stacks of HV and MV circuits and whittle down my supply of those until I manage to, after great time and expense, obtain all the microprocessor mainframes we'll need to simply make and power 1 machine. My God. Oh, and dyslexia side note, it's tungsten steel, not tungsten carbide. It's not my fault that my brain doesn't work. Well, anyways, while that smelts up, we can just work on some other resources like graphene and a new type of rubber for the electric motors. Yeah, platinum and tungsten cables are too good for regular rubber, so I need to make some silicon rubber. It's not as good as styrene butadiene rubber, but that's honestly for later. And thankfully, the large chemical reactor does make it plenty easy to produce silicon rubber, so we have more than enough to coat all of our various and expensive new wires. Graphene just requires us to make graphite, which we can get from diamond ore processing, and I do that at extreme voltage because why not at this point? I mean, it's not like microprocessor supercomputers are the second most expensive thing for me to make. But after all that smelting and crafting and processing and reacting, I can finally claim my prize of an IV assembler and power converter. Our last obstacle to HSSG coils is, well, HSSG. And the Greg gods doth smile upon me, as HSSG is made up of all resources that we already have automated. So it's just a matter of time to mix it up and toss it into an EBF, and at this point, I have mastered the art of waiting around. And I truly do wait around as I make 576 smelted and cooled ingots of the stuff, which I just jam right into my IV assembler with a bunch of tungsten-y bits, and out comes our wonderful new high-speed coils. And finally, my EBFs can run with speed unmatched, and I can pollute the air. I've won. But why do I feel so empty, unfulfilled? Was this just hubris? This entire time a mask for insecurity? Do I even hate the clean room? Should I even hate the clean room? Am I really to escape this floating rock with malice and warfare? No, I see it now. My base is in shambles. My power supply crippled. I've taken the wrong course. The only path to escape is clean.